Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Burke County Board of Commissioners recess meeting for Thursday, January the 30th, 2020. Please check your telephones for me right now if you would. Cut those babies on silent or vibrate or however you want them. And anything else that might make a little bit of noise because I can't hear good. When you come up here, if anybody does, well, I guess we're going to have one speaker today, so we just use the microphones up there. So, Madam Clerk, I know that Commissioner Taylor was going to go to Raleigh, and I don't know where Commissioner Abley is. So we'll proceed forward because we do have a quorum here for the meeting. Gentlemen, in front of you is the agenda for today's meeting. I'll entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Madam Clerk, that's 3-0. Our items for decision today are an acceptance of the needs assessment survey for the new Animal Services Center, and that's going to be presented, it says by me, but I'm not. I'm going to turn it over to Michael Bernard from Shelter Planners of America, the consultant that we have hired to look at this for us. I think Michael has to catch a plane to go back home later on, so we'll let him get started. Michael, good to see you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Well, first of all, just thank you for an opportunity to come share the findings of the needs assessment study for a new animal shelter for Burke County. We've got a little PowerPoint presentation set up that's basically the cliff notes of the full needs assessment study. I'm just going to introduce us. I'm going to talk about animal shelter design that's going on, some of the goals, and then specifically the findings of your study, and then open it up for questions, because I think a lot of times there are questions about this subject. So just first, a little shameless self-promotion. Shelter Planners of America is the most experienced animal shelter design firm in the nation. We've been around for over 30 years. We've worked with over 750 different groups, all kinds, from humane societies to public animal control facilities, etc. We're really the only person that has a background in shelter operations. So it kind of gives us an inside look. That map, I think, shows about 250 of the most recent shelters. So you can see, I think it's 35 states represented there. Animal shelter design, of course, has evolved tremendously over the years. It kind of emerged in the early 40s as a response to rabies epidemics, and you know, Shelter Planners of America has been involved in really trying to change those buildings. They were dark, damp, wet, loud, kind of awful places to go. And certainly even from 1974, when your shelter was built, you know, the society's evolved a lot even in that period of time. But just talking about some of the things we like to incorporate into the design of animal shelters these days is certainly implementing the best practices that are available in humane animal care. Reducing stress in animals through better separation between species, more comfortable kennels, two-compartment housing. There's a lot of factors that make this, you know, the housing for the animals better. Certainly, reducing the spread of disease is paramount. So proper HVAC systems, drainage, proper finishes that can be easily disinfected, things of that nature. You know, creating a warm and welcoming environment is a little surprising to people. You know, it's just the dog pound, right? Well, really, we are in the business of selling slightly used or pre-owned pets, where we really are a retailer. And so you need to think more like, you know, Target or whatever big retail chain that you have here. And so creating an environment that's pleasing for people to come to might allow them to stay longer and maybe discover their new best friend. Socialization of animals, we think all animals should be viewable, with the exception of maybe a few medical animals that would be behind the scenes. And we want to increase that animal-human bond by more interaction, get acquainted rooms, walking trails, cat-free rooms where people can go in there and actually interact with the cats. We think that the shelter should be leading the way on solving the problem of animal overpopulation, primarily through, pretty aggressive spay-neuter program and education. The Humane Society of the United States has said for 2 decades now, we'll overcome animal overpopulation in the U.S. by 3 things: sterilization, education, and legislation. And we think if the shelter's not going to be the place that's carrying the message of responsible pet ownership, we're not really sure who else is going to do it. So we think the shelter should be designed with that in mind. And then it's last on the list, but not, it's actually very important, is creating an environment for the staff to excel in what they're doing. Staff turnover in animal shelter is very high. Training new staff is expensive. The attitude of the staff and how it telegraphs to the potential adopters is read clearly. People understand that clearly. And so again, you're in a retail business, and we just haven't found that it's real expensive to have just thought carefully about your staff. Where do they park? Where do they come in? Where's the time clock? Do I have a locker? Do I have the right equipment to care for the animals? It's not we're not building them all private jacuzzis in their offices, but we just need to, think about it carefully. These are the things that are covered in the report, and I believe Kay sent it out to everybody, so everybody's had a chance to look at it. And what we're going to cover right now is just a real brief snapshot of that. So, just looking at, the current housing situation, for dogs, you have 16 dog runs. Unfortunately, with the intake that you have, that results in only a 4-day average length of stay. That's actually really short. The national norm now is probably 10 to 12. And so that's just hardly enough time to cover the required stray hold period. So once it's past the stray hold period, it really needs to be on the adoption floor longer than that. With the cats, we have a little bit longer average length of stay, 9.6 days. So that's not real bad. The existing shelter, we toured it. Actually, I toured it a couple times. It's just a typical 1974 animal shelter, dog pound, really. It was designed for dogs. There's probably really no provision for cats. And it's just due to be replaced. There's not much, we didn't go through an exhaustive list of deficiencies, but we could write several pages about that. So the people and animal levels is really the key to the determining how much animal housing that we think that you would need. So we look at the human population, we look at how many animals are coming into the shelter now, and we basically establish a ratio of animal intake to human population. So your current ratio is 3.62. So the national norm is about 2 to 3%. So you're actually above that a little bit. Not real bad. There's places in the South that are 5%. So they have, or we've even seen in Mississippi as high as 7. But there are a lot of places around the country, New York, California, and all through the Midwest, Indiana, Ohio, where it's about 1% or less. So, that's a national norm, but you're kind of tipping the high side of that. Then we look at the projected human population. So in your case, the human population is expected to go up. So therefore, we would expect the animal intake to go up. But that's not always the case, and I'll say more about that later. Just looking at the disposition of the animals, you had 24% of your animals that were adopted or transferred. That's actually quite lower than the national norms that we see at modern shelters. Your return to owner is, probably okay. It's 7%. We'd like to see that a little bit higher. So there are programs to do a more proactive return to owner or even return to owner in field. The euthanization rate here is very high. Nationally, there's a really big push by a lot of people to try to get to a 90% live release rate. And, that's a real challenge for open admission, county-run animal shelters sometimes. But we have lots and lots of examples. I did a whole talk at several national animal welfare seminars on the subject where people were able to increase adoption, not necessarily by building a bigger building, but through programs. There's a lot of programs that can be done to improve that. The died-in shelter number was just fine. So we looked at your historical data. So we looked not just, what was the animal intake in 2018, but actually we went back 5 years. And fortunately, the shelter had good records, so we were able to see, what it was. And you can see there on, does this have a pointer on it? Right here. So at one point, not that long ago, your animal intake was 4.65% of the human population, and now it's down to 3.62. So we see nationally animal intake declining at shelters. There's just a lot more awareness about animal welfare in our culture. You'll remember the cartoons back in the day with Peanuts, the Snoopy cartoon. He was in a doghouse in the backyard, but today's cartoon is Brian, the Family Guy, and he's on the couch and he's controlling the remote. You see at restaurants, there's places you can bring your pet. At the airport, there's pet relief stations because people are taking their pets on the plane. And it's just a little bit different, and so responsible pet ownership has come up a little bit. So we see it declining all across the nation. The crystal ball work in this exercise is really just trying to figure out, but in Burke County, exactly where are we at? What's the culture here? So we asked several questions during the needs assessment process that we're trying to draw that out, but this is just pure math. So, and you can't read it up here, but basically the rate of decline as a ratio of the human population, the intake to the human population is declining, and it's a logarithm of just the rate of decline, not just a straight line graph. And we do think that on that, based on 5-year data, your intake is in a downward trend. Now, we usually look at a 10 or 20-year planning horizon. So if you came way out here somewhere, you'd need a shelter, with much less animal housing. Unfortunately, you can't do that. The shelter might be built in the coming years, so we just drew a line as about when we thought that might be based on some indications. If you build it sooner, it may be a little different result, but we drew a line, and so we're saying this is the target that we've earmarked and put in the report for consideration. I think there was an animal advisory board meeting last night, and there was at least one email I saw early this morning that said, I think we need more animal housing. We can certainly add more animal housing. We just know that building a big building and warehousing animals actually doesn't increase adoption. I've got a slide to talk about the things that really need to happen, but we can certainly make the building bigger. This is really the question: will housing more animals or housing animals for a longer period of time actually increase adoption? And we know from our experience it actually does not. Does anybody have any question about that? I've got a whole little analysis of how we can show you why that's not true, but it takes about a few minutes to unpack. I can come back to it if the size of the building is of a concern.
That was the same analysis you used in the...
It's about a 2 or 3 page writing to try to help people. This comes up all the time. Your advisory board member that wrote that email would not be a lone voice in America. It's very common, and so we put that in there to try to explain why that's not the solution. But
does anybody in the audience want to hear an explanation of that right now? Go ahead.
It was a concern expressed by several people who came to that meeting.
Yeah. The public input meeting or the meeting last night?
Meeting
Okay. Well, let me just unpack it. It's in the report in writing, so you could, and I think Kay made that available to the general public. So, but basically, if you hold animals for a week, and let's say in January you have 100 people come into the shelter, and Caitlin, the staff is very pleasant. You have very, the animals aren't sick. They're all very adoptable. You have a very pleasant staff. You have a pleasant facility. And everybody that came in adopted an animal. So you would adopt 100 animals because 100 people came in. And let's say you did that in February, again, the same amount. March, April, May, you did that all year long. So at the end of the year, you would have adopted 1,200 animals. You're holding animals for 1 week. But now let's say somebody said, well, we'd hold these animals longer. Let's hold them for 2 weeks or 4 weeks, pick any number. But if you only have 100 people come in the door to adopt an animal in January, and let's say again you adopted, 100% of the people that came in left with an animal, you would adopt 100 animals. And if you did that for February, March, all year long, at the end of the year you would have adopted 1,200 animals. So whether you're holding animals for a week or holding animals for 2 weeks or 4 weeks, what really matters is how many people are coming in to adopt an animal. And that's very similar to the situation about the size of the shelter. So a lot of people say, well, we're going to design this shelter to hold 100 animals. So we're going to have 100 people come in the shelter to adopt. Everybody adopts. So you adopt 100 animals in January, you do it all year long, so at the end of the year you've adopted 1,200 animals. But now let's say that the county decided, well, we want to build a much bigger building. We want to hold a lot more animals. So instead of 100 animals, we're going to build a much bigger building and hold 200 animals. But if only 100 people come in the front door in January to adopt, and even if they all adopted, and usually it's more like a 1-to-3 ratio of customers that actually leave with an animal, but for the purpose of this illustration, 100 adoptions were made, and then you did that for 12 months, you would adopt 1,200 animals. So whether you were holding 100 animals or holding 400 animals, what really matters is how many people came in the door to adopt, and how clever is your marketing. And so this is a list of things that we find that shelters that are successful in increasing their adoption rate. And in my talk, I use the example of Allen County SPCA in Fort Wayne, Indiana. They used to adopt 500 animals a year. And under Jessica Henry's leadership and changing of programs, procedures, and a lot of other things, still in the same crappy building, now adopts 2,500 animals a year out of the same crappy little building. Now we're designing our a very modern $8 million, 20,000 square foot new shelter, which they need, but that she wasn't going to wait. That was 5 years ago. She wasn't going to wait to try to, get a building built and then work on increasing adoption. There is a lot that can be done through these principles to increase your live release rate. I think improved facilities it's on the list, and y'all definitely need a new shelter, but I don't know that making it significantly bigger. I mean, we may want to debate about, instead of 50 dogs, maybe we want 60, but it won't be 100. We just don't think building a giant building is going to be a good solution for you. It'd be better to take the money, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, that you'd spend to build a building and spend it doing the other things that would improve. Does that help? Again, it's all in the report, but so what we've proposed is a 14-day average length of stay. We find if you hold animals too long, they actually go cage crazy, and it's actually can be inhumane. Like, you want to be humane, but you don't want to hold the animals in a tiny little box in a shelter environment for too long. So what you need to do is increase your marketing campaign or transfer. There are a lot of animals being moved out of the South to other places in the country where animal overpopulation has been curtailed. And so you can transport those elsewhere. But it takes a lot of staff time to make those connections, make the arrangements for maybe some even expense to get the animals vetted before they go. So it costs money.
Could I make one comment about that?
Yes.
When you bring in strays and on surrenders, often the animals are not in the best health, and it's really not taking into account recovery time and medical treatment. Some of those animals are not going to be ready to be adopted when those hungry people come in.
Well, this is an average, and so this study's based on statistical data that's averages. So any one animal's particular journey through the shelter can vary widely. Maybe a puppy comes in and it's there for, literally 3 days, and another animal that's very sick that you're going to try to nurse back to health has to be there for 3 weeks or 4 weeks, or maybe it got hit by a car, it's got a broken leg. There are foster programs that sometimes you can get a team of people around the community that are willing, that care passionately about animal welfare, and in their home then they care for, let's say kittens. They bottle feed kittens. A lot of shelters will just, if I got 30 kittens, I'm just going to euthanize them because I can't care for all these kittens. But they may develop a foster program, and there's citizens within your community that already are here that are willing to spend that extra time and care to try to save those animals' lives. And so that's just one of many things that's on this list of trying to do programs that can help, help the animals without necessarily building a bigger building. But again, if you want to build a bigger building, we can certainly do that. It really all comes down to how many square feet are we building, because we're going to apply a cost per square foot to this thing. So we developed what's called the building space program. It's not duplicated in these slides, but it's several pages of Excel spreadsheet listing the lobby, the office spaces, the clinic. All those spaces are listed and how big they are, how many of those we need. And this is just the summary of how many square feet that we think this is what we've earmarked for now. There's a long way to go to actually a finished building, but just looking at features about a site, we think these are very important. Visibility, often dog pounds, animal shelters in the past were by the sewage treatment plant or maybe by the city dump on a dead-end road somewhere, and we want to bring it up more where it's more visible. We want to have it accessible. It needs to be centrally located to the masses of the population. We think you've got to study any site that you consider for all the normal stuff like building any building. Are there utilities there? Is the topography relatively flat so it's easy to build, or is it on the side of a cliff? And all those types of factors. We think parking is very important for an animal shelter. You need ample parking if you're a retail business. And then the site size. And we've recommended a size in there that we think is kind of the minimum size. Staffing. So the next couple slides is really for the Board of Supervisors it's a little pointed, but I just want to be very clear. The amount of staff that you currently have caring for the number of animals that come through your shelter is below the norm. And it really, to implement these programs that we're talking about that would increase life release rate, I mean, it doesn't take much staff to take in an animal and for 4 days keep it and then euthanize it. I mean, it takes some staff, but all these things that I'm talking about to increase a live release rate, it takes time. It doesn't happen by itself. You certainly can improve volunteerism, and actually building a new shelter is sometimes the catalyst to really improve volunteerism in your community. but, you know, some good full-time staff to do some other duties other than just pick up animals would be recommended. And that basically gets down to the operating costs. So currently, your cost per animal is about $95 per animal. So based on the number of animals that came in and what we were told is how much money you're spending on, you know, your animal shelter operation, $95 is way below. I mean, it might be the lowest number I think I ever recall seeing. So we have seen a couple in the 175 range in the South, but nationally it's usually a higher number, more like 250. 500 wouldn't apply here. That'd be New York or someplace where the cost of living was higher. But we do think that the operating cost really probably needs, you can build a new building, that's not going to solve all your challenges. You're still going to have almost the same challenges. You just be in a new building doing it. So this is probably one of the biggest takeaways that I'd like to. I'd be glad to answer any questions about it offline, but I think that's important. The size of the building, the 13,900 something square feet, let's just call it 14,000 square feet. We took several built animal shelters that we knew were of good quality, not a pole barn. And if it was built in Virginia in 2017 or Arizona in 2018, we took those and adjusted the price for North Carolina in actually 2019 numbers. Costs are still continue to go up, but we gave you 2019 numbers, a range of kind of where we think you know, the cost would fall to have a decent shelter. You could probably build something cheaper than that, but it wouldn't have stainless steel kenneling. It'd have chain link fence. It wouldn't have epoxy resin floors. It'd be sealed concrete. It wouldn't have 100% outside air for the animal housing. It'd probably just have, well, maybe it doesn't even have air conditioning for the animal housing. That does not include land, but that does. At the we've put a line item in there for soft cost and contingency, because you always need to go with your, you know, with a little padding in your number. But that's our best opinion of probable cost at this juncture. And that is the conclusion of our formal presentation, but we're very glad to answer any questions about the findings.
Mike, I want you to go back for me and elaborate a little bit on the $95.29 per animal, which you said is the lowest you ever seen. What are we not doing where some people are spending $250 on an animal?
Yeah, so two of the biggest drivers for that is staff. When we looked at your numbers, and we get this numbers from everybody, we don't just take your total operating budget, we kind of get it in categories. So staffing for ACOs that are driving around town, and that kind of has to do with your jurisdictional area. Yours is not massive, but you know, Ventura, California, it's 2,700 square miles. Yeah. It takes 2.5 hours to drive over there to get the animal. So ACO costs, but then the other staff, you know, your director, your people that are, you know, working at the shelter, your medical costs, your utility costs, food costs, and then other costs. And the two biggest ones are usually the medical cost and the staffing. Well, we know your staffing is low. So right there, if you increase the amount of staff, add an education director, maybe a marketing coordinator, et cetera, you know, all of a sudden your number will go up. But another factor is the medical care, and I think your question actually kind of, if you're euthanizing an animal after 4 days, you're not spending much money. Most shelters, just will cut to the chase, if they're going to spend more than a certain amount of money to nurse this animal back to life, like they've got a number in their head. It might even be in a policy somewhere. If it's more than $100, we're just going to euthanize the animal. And so if you're trying to nurse animals back to health, obviously that's going to affect your Now, if you can find a trading partner that you can ship those animals to, they probably have to be vetted, so you probably need to hire a vet, or at least part-time, to vet these animals, because transporters, receiving shelters, they don't all want to receive your sick animals. So you just have to find, but there are people that will take them, even unvetted, and they'll do, they've got more money, so they'll do the medical care. But, you got to go out and find those people. They're not everywhere, but there are some. And so I think probably medical care and staffing would be the two. I mean, you're feeding the animals, so the cost of the food is probably about what it is. Now, your building's tiny, so your utility bills aren't much. In a new shelter, that utility bill is going to be quite different. But those are probably the two primary areas.
I read in earnest in the report several times about the modern equipment that is used now in the animal clinics. If we were able to build in several years and we put the flooring and some of those things that are necessary, or what we feel is necessary now, how is what's changing? What's going to come in the future? If we build, are we going to be out of date in 5 years? Or are we going to be where we need to be for a period of time?
I think that's a good question. I think where we're at now, the things that we would recommend are going to carry you a really long time. But we did have a client that said, well, we want to build our building for a 70-year planning horizon, because they'd been in their building for 70 years. And so, this was in an interview, and so while I want to be able to instill in them that we would be able to do that, we honestly, just the advancements in animal contraception. Like, right now the solution is spay and neuter. So you got to pay a vet so much money to, do a surgery, have a room to do it. And they're making strides in animal contraception. That could completely change the dynamic. So I don't know that we can really answer that question, but for the foreseeable future, you should be in good shape.
The gentleman, questions?
In looking at your report and the square footages that you proposed in various areas, are there minimum size standards anywhere, or who makes those?
Yeah, another very good question. That actually came up at the public meeting. The size of the animal housing is actually regulated by the state of North Carolina. So for cats, the minimum is 4 square feet per cat. What we've included is what's a guideline, a recommendation, if you will, from the Shelter Vet Association. So that's 18 square feet per cat. That's a pretty big difference. Similarly, on dogs, you could get away with a single compartment that's 4 foot by 6 foot, and we've shown double compartments. Every dog has 2 spaces, a primary enclosure where their food, bedding, and water would be, and then a secondary enclosure where they can go to go to the bathroom, eliminate, away from their primary enclosure, which is a natural instinct. UC Davis vet school did a study that even foxes, in the wild, their kits, their babies leave the den and go eliminate outside of the den. They don't go to the bathroom where they've got their nest. So I think just in terms of the 5 freedoms that have talked about in animal welfare, and the ability to do what's normal for the animal, that 2 compartment housing is really important, but not required. So could you not do that? And would that make the building smaller? It would. But this is what we think represents best practice by a lot of organizations beyond just the Shelter Vet Association, but Humane Society of the United States, Best Friends Animal Society, the Association for Advancement of Animal Welfare would all promote 2 compartment housing. So if you told us, no, you don't want to do that, we would design the building. It's your building. So but we were asked to tell you what we thought, so this is what we think.
So you're proposing almost 4 times the minimum required space for cats and 2 times the minimum space for dogs, is that, am I reading
That's
that?
probably a pretty good snapshot of it. And as you can see, the amount of the square footage of the 14,000 square feet, this number right here, combined with the outdoor run, so 5,700 of that, so what is that, 40% of it is in the animal housing. So if you took a different approach on the animal housing, that one thing would make a big difference.
You also, I think, proposed a significant medical area. Of course, we're not doing really any medical, apparently, at this point. What are you envisioning being done in that area?
So in the state of North Carolina, the animal shelter owned and operated by the county cannot compete with private veterinary practice. So we're not talking about doing any veterinary medicine, first off, so let me just say that. All that's going to happen in this clinic is primarily spay and neuter. And that is one of the key factors to reducing animal overpopulation moving forward. Like, it's part of the solution, not just a Band-Aid on a problem. So can you get that done other ways rather than doing it in-house? Yes. If you could find a veterinarian that wanted to work with you and you just took the animals to them, you got them all spayed and neutered, and then brought them back to the shelter, then got them adopted. But the logistics of all that and ongoing a vet that's willing to work with you is not something that's in your control. And so we found that groups, it really slows down their average length of stay, the logistical hassle of trying to get that done off-site. So if you can do your own spay-neuter clinic on-site, it's probably a better strategy. But again, if you didn't want to do that, you want to delete that we do shelters that do not have a spay-neuter clinic on-site.
The clinic would then require you to have a vet to come and do that, and that's something
They have
that,
to come to the shelter.
that's not a practice that a technician or somebody other than a vet would do.
No,
that.
sir. You'd need a vet tech too. If you look at the staffing, we're proposing that there would be a part-time vet and a part-time vet tech too. And we did meet with the vet that you're currently contract with, by the way, for quite a while. I don't remember. Huh?
I'm sorry.
Okay, I'm sorry, I don't remember the doctor's name, but we,
Dr. Dunning.
but we met with him for quite a while, asking him about what he thought, and so some of the things that are in there are a little bit influenced by somebody that's not your current paid staff. So they came from outside the room, so to speak. But it all seemed very reasonable to us based on other assessments that we did, so we didn't see any red flags about it. We've seen some weird things, but he seemed pretty practical.
No,
No. You jumped in, but I think this is actually not a public comment type of a meeting.
It's not. I just wanted that one explanation for y'all to make sure you were clear on it. This is kind of for us today. If I get to a point that I think I might want to do this, we will, but right now it's us, okay?
Okay.
Michael, on this, when you start looking at numbers, and I've listened obviously to the presentation before and the explanation of cost, just for somebody that may watch this, pull this up, say, because we're going to get asked, 11,000 square foot interior space, why is it gonna cost $10 million?
Yeah.
And you gave a very good explanation
That's a
on
very
the
good
phone.
question.
And so, you know, and I understood it then, but for the average layperson that's just sitting around that has no idea, never heard that explanation, that doesn't understand how the per square foot cost can be so high, would you just explain that in just basic terms?
That's a very good point, one that I didn't really cover. But it is explained in the needs assessment study.
It is.
I think it's, sorry, I don't remember the chapter number. I think it's chapter 9. But basically, animal shelters are a very unique building type. So you have your schools, your libraries, your office buildings, your strip shopping centers. All these building types kind of have a complexity ratio or whatever. So hospitals are kind of more expensive than some other, than a warehouse. We'll just use two extremes. You got medical gases, you've got, operating equipment and all that. Well, animal shelters actually fit in that very complex mode. You've got more walls per square foot. So let's take a school where the walls are roughly 20 feet on center for, housing the children. But in an animal shelter, they're like 5 feet apart. So in that 20 feet classroom, I built 4 other walls. Oh yeah, and they're masonry walls, not sheetrock walls. Let's look at plumbing. This is actually the highest amount of plumbing per square foot. Like if you just count how many drains or plumbing fixtures, sinks, toilets in a regular build, like an office building, you probably have a few sinks at some break rooms, and you've got some toilets down the hall. You got 15 toilet fixtures spread out over a 10,000 square foot plate line or floor plate. This building has more plumbing per square foot than any other building type that we've studied. We've gone and looked at a lot of them. It's a lot. It has special disease-resistant finishes that are just more expensive than carpet or tile or a lot of the things that are in most buildings. The air conditioning system is very unique to introduce, a disease-resistant system. You buy bigger air conditioning, bigger ducts. There's more air changes per hour than probably what's in here. And so the air conditioning is more expensive. And everywhere you turn about this little, it's not that big of a building. I'm probably a elementary school here is 60,000 square feet. This 14,000 square feet. It's not a big building, but all that's crammed into this little 14,000 square feet. And so when you divide the cost per square foot, it looks askew. And it is much of the conversation that goes on about this building type. Well, why are we spending that much money on the animals? Well, we could not do the disease-resistant finishes. We could not do this. We could not do a medical clinic. There's a lot of things we could not do and probably reduce the cost. You're probably not going to get the walls further apart because those kennel sizes are kind of what they are. So we can't just say, well, we're going to do the kennels 20 feet wide. Well, you won't get as many animals in there, so that's kind of defeating the purpose. But some of the things you could tone down, but that's kind of the reason we gave the range. We didn't just say this is the price. There's a lot of variables, and right now, we're looking at an Excel spreadsheet. We don't have any building plans. We certainly haven't had all those hard conversations about all the stuff I just talked about. Is that in? Is it out? Well, maybe, like I was just in Williamson County, Tennessee yesterday. That's the county just south of Nashville. They're building a new $12 million animal shelter. But, we were wrestling with, are we going to have 100% outside air for all the animal housing, or maybe only 50%? Certainly all the medical housing must be 100% exhausted. We don't want to if the animal's sick, we don't want to recirculate that air anywhere, but those conversations go on deep into the design process, not just on a report. That's why we gave you a range. It's somewhere between this and that, but even the low end is not a pole barn. It's still a reasonable building. It just might not have all the features that we might like to have.
Thank you, Michael. That's a good explanation. And then just one other question, just for my curiosity, and I agree with the number. We're showing an increase in population over the next 20 years of 10%. just for my information, because I think it's going to be at least 10%. Where did you pull that from?
We always get the population data from the county. So the client tells us. If we just go out on the internet, there's varying sources, and so we don't pretend to be population demographic experts. So we rely on the client to give us that data, so that the county provided that. Now, most of the time, if we work for a humane society and they're a nonprofit, they don't have GIS and they don't have a lot of the resources. Most of the time counties, because they're planning other services, even highways or water work projects, they've looked at their population growth pretty hard. So I suspect what you gave us was as good as information that's available. But I would just point out that the trend of animal intake is down. So it'd be very unlikely that the human population was that far off that it would be so much that, oh my gosh, it's a problem. But I will just add this. Generally, when we design a building, we go ahead and design for future expansion, even if we think your intake's going down. Because, hey, we don't know what a 70-year planning horizon. Animal welfare is still evolving. As animal overpopulation has been overcome in other parts of the country, they're trying to rebrand themselves as a humane society or even a municipally owned shelter. What services are we providing? Well, they become a pet resource in the community, and they're kind of rebranding themselves as to what they're going to do. So I think having it's just good planning, whether you were doing a library or what you were doing, to just think about how. Here's the design, but if you ever need to add on to it, how would that be done? And if you hire us as your architect, you're going to get that, because we just think it's good practice.
Mr. Cameron? You answer? Okay. Does your data indicate that pet ownership is going up and maybe people are taking better care of their pets is one of the reasons our intake is going down?
Nationally, pet ownership is going up. It used to be 39%, now it's up a little bit. So I think as our culture is morphing, it will probably still continue to rise. The number of pets in your community is not really what we're measuring. What we're really measuring is irresponsible pet ownership. That's why every animal shelter in every community is unique to its community. There are urban environments where we've worked where the animal intake in certain zip codes is very high, like really high. And other zip codes, it's good. We've done studies in retirement communities, near Air Force Base where everybody's a retired colonel. They all love their pets more than they ever love their children. So their intake ratio is like crazy low. And their return to owner, like if their animal got out, they go get, their return to owner numbers like off the chart. So it's really a complexion of the community is really what we're trying, the data that we collected that we're trying to analyze, not just the gross number of pets in the community.
But in the same vein, you think your programs are going to change the complexion of the community? Is that
Yes.
correct? Is that what we're saying?
We hope you work yourself out of a job, but in the meantime, you're going to need a building to help you do that. As I mentioned, there are places in the country, they got a 30,000 square foot animal shelter with housing for 100 dogs, and there's only 20 dogs in there. But they're doing other things. They're doing, pet behavior programs to be able to help people, keep their pet, and, lots of other services, including public-facing medical services. A lot of shelters are going to become the next animal hospitals in their community. Not government-run shelters per se, and particularly not in North Carolina where that law exists, but nonprofits.
You've given us a wide range to think about. I can talk to each one of these ladies out here, and they're all going to give me their opinions. But I still have to, we have a fiduciary responsibility to try to build this at a, we've got to satisfy a lot of needs, but again, we have to always remember how much money we're spending. Some people don't own pets and they could care less, you know.
That's right, and they're a taxpayer and they're paying for it.
And we're paid for it, so.
Yep. Very
I'm
good
glad you give us that opportunity to see where the range is here, where the range is here. Some programs may be modified, and I know we're in the infancy stage to where we're going, but I do appreciate that so that we can see that. Gives us a lot to think about. Anybody else have any questions?
Lisa.
I think at some point, for y'all's benefit, we're going to include you in everything that we do, okay, at some point. This today is for us to see the complete presentation and give us some idea of what we're thinking about. We are diligently looking at places in the county, trying to find an area that would be suitable for a new animal services center. We have several in mind right now. Every time I bring him back, it costs me money.
It does. Sorry about that.
But I'm going to bring him back, and we're going to do some walkthroughs of some places that we're looking at, and that we may be able to use, and it might be a good spot because there's some recommendations on here. So I think that's going to be our next steps. We're close to we found 2 that we were very comfortable with, and we'll get you back to take a walk through after we talk a little bit more about what's been presented to us today and see if we can get a vision of what we actually think after we talk with our advisory board and see what their input is and some before we get to the public itself, and see where we need to go and what we think. We don't know what we want yet. Yeah. Obviously, we've got a picture, we have a vision, so we've got to put all that together. So, if we don't have anything else, Brian, you got anything at all? Awful quiet today.
He has been pretty quiet.
I think he's just thinking about the future budgets.
Yeah, probably.
Okay.
Well,
All right.
again, thank you very much for having us.
Thank you.
If there's any follow-up questions that come along later, we'll let Kay
Okay.
know and she can reach out to us.
All right, thank you. I think I can get you down to your airplane on time. All right, sir. Thank you so much. Gentlemen, is there anything else that needs to come before us? Yeah. Okay, anything that we need? Yeah, that's the only thing I got. Motion to accept the report.
So move.
All right, all in favor? That'll be 3-0, Kay. Okay, if there's not anything else in front of us, we will be adjourned. Thank you all for coming.
Hello, I'm Brian Steen, the Burke County Manager, and I'd like to introduce you to Zeke, Ty, and Chloe. They're my 3 pets, and I adopted them all from rescue agencies. I hope if you're thinking about getting a dog or a cat, you'll consider contacting our local rescue agencies and adopt one. If you have a cat or a dog, I hope you'll also consider having them spay or neutered to help us reduce the number of unwanted pets in Burke County. Whatever you can do to help us would be appreciated, and in a moment we'll show you some contact information for both the rescue agencies in Burke County and agencies that can help you with low-cost spay and neuter. Thank you again, I hope you have a great day. Wolf.